Over the past decade, the United States has experienced significant changes in crime rates and incarceration patterns. Beginning in 2014, the nation saw a general downward trend in violent and property crimes, reflecting years of improved law enforcement techniques, community programs, and technology integration. However, the onset of the COVID-19 pandemic in 2020 disrupted this pattern, bringing with it a surge in certain types of crime, especially homicides and aggravated assaults. According to the FBI, the national homicide rate rose nearly 30% in 2020, the largest single-year increase since national records began in the 1960s. Gun violence spiked across major cities including Chicago, New York, Philadelphia, and Los Angeles, with some cities reporting homicide rates not seen in over 2 decades. Meanwhile, robberies and burglaries showed a mixed pattern, partly due to lockdowns, business closures, and economic instability. Property crimes such as car theft and catalytic converter theft surged, reflecting a shift in criminal opportunities tied to social disruption. Simultaneously, cybercrime grew exponentially, with identity theft, online scams, ransomware attacks, and fraud targeting individuals and businesses alike. The FBI's Internet Crime Complaint Center, IC3, reported that cybercrime complaints more than tripled from 2014 to 2023, with reported losses exceeding $10 billion in 2022 alone. While street-level crimes gained headlines, another crisis deepened quietly: America's incarceration rate. The United States remains the country with the highest incarceration rate in the world, with over 1.9 million people in jail or prison as of 2024. In 2014, that number hovered around 2.2 million, and while some states have made progress in reducing their prison populations, others have lagged behind. The national incarceration rate dropped temporarily during the height of the pandemic due to early releases and fewer arrests, but by 2022, numbers started climbing again. Much of this rise has been tied to stricter enforcement policies in urban centers and increased immigration detention. Moreover, incarceration still disproportionately affects Black and Latino communities. Black Americans are incarcerated at nearly 5 times the rate of white Americans. Despite only making up about 13% of the total United States population, Black individuals represent roughly 1/3 of the prison population. Native American and Hispanic communities also face disproportionate imprisonment. Meanwhile, women, especially women of color, have become the fastest-growing incarcerated demographic over the past 10 years. Many are imprisoned for non-violent offenses, including drug possession and probation violations. As mass incarceration policies continue to affect millions, the economic and social impacts remain immense. Incarceration affects job prospects, housing eligibility, and family structures, with children of incarcerated parents facing higher risks of poverty and academic failure. Additionally, the continued use of private for-profit prisons has stirred national debate. In 2024, approximately 8% of state and federal prisoners are housed in private facilities, raising questions about profit motives and accountability. Policy-wise, some progress has been made. Marijuana decriminalization across multiple states has contributed to a reduction in drug-related arrests and helped ease jail overcrowding. Several states have implemented bail reform, pretrial diversion programs, and initiatives to reduce juvenile incarceration. Still, critics argue that these reforms are often underfunded, inconsistently applied, and lack the systemic overhaul necessary to dismantle mass incarceration. Recidivism remains a challenge, with about 40% of released individuals rearrested within 3 years. Mental health and addiction continue to go largely untreated in jails and prisons where resources remain scarce. Police departments are also under intense scrutiny, especially after a series of high-profile cases involving police brutality and racial discrimination. Public trust in law enforcement has fluctuated throughout the decade, with communities calling for increased transparency, civilian oversight, and the reallocation of funds towards social services. In recent years, protests and advocacy movements have played a crucial role in drawing attention to both crime and punishment. From the George Floyd protests in 2020 to continued calls for prison abolition and justice reform, civil society has pressured local and federal leaders to act. The federal government has responded with mixed results. While some bipartisan efforts have led to sentencing reform, political polarization has slowed comprehensive changes. As of 2024, crime in major cities has started to stabilize, with homicide and assault rates slightly declining compared to their 2020 peaks. Still, the long-term effects of pandemic-era disruptions, economic inequality, and mental health neglect continue to fuel certain crime categories. America now stands at a crossroads. Continue with punitive approaches or double down on rehabilitation, education, and prevention strategies. Looking forward, experts agree that the next decade will be critical. The integration of artificial intelligence in policing, data-driven crime prediction, and expanded surveillance may change how crimes are detected and prosecuted, but these advances also raise privacy concerns. Additionally, grassroots community programs, trauma-informed care, and restorative justice models are gaining momentum as alternatives to traditional incarceration. The debate over justice in America is not just about crime statistics, it's about the kind of society the country wants to build. With over 70 million Americans holding a criminal record of some kind, the stakes are high. The conversation around crime must include education, poverty, addiction, race, technology, and mental health, not just handcuffs and cells. Whether the nation leans toward punishment or progress will define the American justice system for generations to come.
The year 2025 marked a significant shift in U.S. trade policy. The implementation of a 10% universal tariff on all imports sent shockwaves through the global economy. This blanket tariff, however, was just the beginning. The administration imposed even higher tariffs on goods from specific nations. China faced a hefty 34% tariff, while India, Japan, and the EU were hit with 26, 24, and 20% tariffs, respectively. This protectionist stance signaled a departure from decades of trade liberalization, ushering in a new era of economic nationalism. These tariffs represent a dramatic change in U.S. trade policy. They're a clear signal that the U.S. is willing to prioritize its own economic interests, even at the expense of its trading partners. This has led to a great deal of uncertainty in the global economy, as businesses and investors try to assess the long-term impact of these policies. This new era of trade protectionism is driven by a number of factors, including the perception that the US has been taken advantage of in trade deals, the desire to protect American jobs, and the belief that a more protectionist stance will help to reduce the trade deficit. However, these tariffs have also drawn criticism from those who argue that they will harm the US economy by raising prices for consumers, hurting businesses that rely on imports and sparking a trade war. The impact of these tariffs is already being felt around the world. Businesses are facing higher costs, consumers are paying more for goods and services, and there is a growing risk of a global trade war. It remains to be seen what the long-term impact of these tariffs will be, but it is clear that they have ushered in a new era of trade protectionism. The stated goals of these tariffs are twofold. Firstly, they aim to protect American industries from what the administration perceives as unfair competition from abroad. By increasing the cost of imported goods, the tariffs are designed to make American-made products more appealing to consumers. This, in theory, should bolster domestic manufacturing and create jobs. Secondly, the tariffs are intended to reduce the long-standing US trade deficit. By making imports more expensive, the administration hopes to curb the inflow of foreign goods and encourage the consumption of domestically produced alternatives. This, they argue, will help to balance the trade ledger and boost the American economy. The underlying assumption behind these goals is that by making foreign goods more expensive, American consumers will shift their spending to domestically produced goods. This increase in demand, the argument goes, will lead to increased production, job creation, and ultimately a more robust American economy. However, this simplistic view ignores the complexities of the global supply chain and the interconnectedness of the global economy. The effectiveness of tariffs in achieving these goals is a subject of much debate. Critics argue that tariffs are a blunt instrument that often leads to unintended consequences, such as higher prices for consumers, retaliation from trading partners, and job losses in sectors that rely on imports. They argue that a more nuanced approach, focusing on targeted investments in education, infrastructure, and research and development, would be more effective in strengthening the American economy in the long run. Moreover, the focus on the trade deficit as a measure of economic health is misleading. The trade deficit is a complex issue influenced by a multitude of factors, including currency valuations, global investment flows, and domestic savings rates. Simply reducing the trade deficit does not necessarily translate to a healthier economy. In fact, a shrinking trade deficit could be a sign of a weakening economy, as it could indicate a decline in consumer spending or business investment. The imposition of these tariffs reflects a deep-seated belief in the power of protectionism to revitalize the American economy. However, the success of this strategy remains uncertain. The global economy is far too interconnected and the potential for unintended consequences too high to predict with any certainty the ultimate impact of these tariffs. The US tariffs have not been met with silence. Key trading partners, particularly China and the EU, have responded with retaliatory tariffs of their own. These countermeasures have primarily targeted sectors where the US has a significant export market, such as agriculture, technology, and energy. China, for instance, has imposed tariffs on soybeans, a major American agricultural export. The EU has targeted American products like bourbon and motorcycles. This tit-for-tat exchange of tariffs has escalated trade tensions, raising concerns of a full-blown trade war. The retaliatory tariffs imposed by China and the EU are a direct response to the US tariffs. These tariffs are designed to inflict economic pain on American businesses and workers in key sectors. The goal is to pressure the US government to reconsider its protectionist policies. This trade war is having a ripple effect throughout the global economy. Businesses are facing uncertainty, consumers are seeing rising prices, and investors are becoming more risk-averse. The International Monetary Fund, IMF, has warned that a prolonged trade war could shave off a significant percentage of global GDP growth. The escalating trade tensions are a clear indication that the global trading system is under strain. The rules-based order that has governed international trade for decades is being challenged. This is leading to a great deal of uncertainty and volatility in the global economy. Section 4. Economic consequences, unraveling supply chains and rising prices. The economic consequences of these tariffs are already being felt across the United States economy. Production costs for businesses that rely on imported materials have surged, squeezing profit margins and forcing some companies to pass on the costs to consumers. Supply chains, meticulously constructed over decades of globalization, are being disrupted. American consumers are experiencing the pinch at the checkout counter. Prices for everyday goods, from groceries to electronics, have begun to rise, eroding purchasing power. The automotive industry, heavily reliant on a global supply chain, has been particularly hard hit, with prices for both domestic and imported vehicles climbing. The tariffs have introduced a great deal of uncertainty into the global economy. This uncertainty is making it difficult for businesses to plan for the future. Many businesses are delaying investment and hiring decisions, which could slow economic growth. The tariffs are also leading to a rise in inflation. As the cost of imported goods rises, businesses are forced to pass these costs on to consumers in the form of higher prices. This is leading to a decline in consumer purchasing power, which could further slow economic growth. The tariffs are having a negative impact on the United States economy. They are raising prices for consumers, hurting businesses, and disrupting supply chains. The long-term economic consequences of these tariffs are still uncertain, but they are likely to be negative. Section 5. The automotive industry adapts shifting production and rising costs. The automotive industry, a poster child of globalization, is grappling with the new realities of a more protectionist trade environment. Major automakers, accustomed to sourcing parts and assembling vehicles across borders, are scrambling to adjust. Some companies are shifting production back to the United States to avoid tariffs. However, this shift comes at a cost. Building new factories or retooling existing ones requires significant investment. Additionally, the domestic workforce, while skilled, may not be readily available in the numbers required, potentially leading to labor shortages and higher wages. The automotive industry is a complex global ecosystem with parts often crossing multiple borders during the manufacturing process. The tariffs have disrupted this delicate balance, forcing automakers to rethink their supply chains and manufacturing footprints. The shift towards domestic production, while presented as a solution, is not without its challenges. Building new factories or repurposing existing ones takes time and significant capital investment. Moreover, the availability of a skilled workforce cannot be guaranteed, potentially leading to labor shortages and driving up wages. These challenges highlight the difficulty of unwinding decades of globalization. The automotive industry, once a symbol of the benefits of free trade, is now grappling with the costs of protectionism. Section 6. A House divided economists and labor unions on the tariff tightrope. The response to the tariffs has been far from unified. Economists are largely critical, arguing that tariffs are a blunt instrument that often fails to achieve its intended goals and can lead to unintended consequences like higher prices and job losses in other sectors. Labor unions, on the other hand, are more divided. While some welcome the tariffs as a necessary measure to protect American jobs, others express concern about the potential for retaliatory tariffs to harm industries that rely on exports. This division highlights the complex trade-offs inherent in any protectionist policy. While tariffs may offer some short-term benefits to specific industries, they can also impose costs on other sectors and consumers. The debate over tariffs has exposed a fundamental divide in how different groups view the role of trade in the economy. Economists, with their focus on efficiency and comparative advantage, tend to view tariffs as market distortions that hinder economic growth. Labor unions, on the other hand, prioritize job security and wage growth, often viewing trade as a potential threat to these goals. This divide is not easily bridged. Finding policies that balance the need for a competitive economy with the imperative of protecting workers' livelihoods is a significant challenge. It requires a nuanced approach that goes beyond simplistic solutions like tariffs. The current debate over tariffs underscores the importance of open dialogue and collaboration between policymakers, economists, and labor leaders. Only through such dialogue can we hope to develop trade policies that benefit all Americans.
America, the land of the free, home of the brave, and now apparently the land of the tariff. In a move that surprised few and alarmed many, the U.S. has slapped tariffs on a whole host of imports. From cars to computers, steel to soybeans, it seems like everything's coming with an extra price tag. The goal? To protect American jobs, boost domestic industries, and finally tackle that pesky trade deficit. But is this economic nationalism or a recipe for isolation and disaster? The new trade policy is a gamble, a high-stakes bet on the future of the American economy. Supporters say it's a much-needed correction, a way to level the playing field and bring back manufacturing jobs. Critics warn of a trade war, with higher prices for consumers and retaliation from trading partners. Only time will tell who's right, but one thing's for sure, the global trade landscape just got a whole lot more interesting. So buckle up, buttercups, because we're diving headfirst into the wild world of tariffs, trade wars, and the economic forces shaping our future. We'll be talking to the experts, the workers on the front lines, and maybe even a few politicians, though no promises on that last one. It's going to be a bumpy ride. Let's cut to the chase. What exactly are we dealing with here? The US has imposed a blanket tariff of 10% on almost all imports. Think of it as a participation trophy for being part of the global economy, except this trophy costs you money. But wait, there's more. China, our favorite economic frenemy, gets hit with an additional 34% tariff on their goods. India, Japan, and the EU aren't off the hook either, facing their own set of hefty tariffs. The message is clear. America first, everyone else fend for yourselves. The Trump administration argues that these tariffs are necessary to protect American jobs and industries from unfair competition. They claim that countries like China have been playing fast and loose with trade rules, manipulating their currencies and stealing intellectual property. And let's be honest, they're not entirely wrong. But here's the thing about tariffs. They're a blunt instrument, like trying to perform surgery with a sledgehammer. You might fix one problem, but you're likely to create a whole bunch of new ones in the process. And that's exactly what we're seeing now, as the global economy grapples with the fallout from America's tariff tantrum. Unsurprisingly, the rest of the world isn't exactly thrilled about America's go-it-alone approach to trade. The EU, Canada, Mexico, and China have all retaliated with tariffs of their own, targeting key American exports like soybeans, bourbon, and motorcycles. It's a classic case of economic tit-for-tat, with each side trying to inflict as much pain as possible on the other. Global markets are in a tailspin, with stock prices plummeting and investors running for cover. The IMF warns of a global recession, and even the usually optimistic folks at Goldman Sachs are using words like stagflation. It seems the only people happy about this whole mess are the doomsday preppers, who are finally seeing their dreams of economic collapse come true. But beyond the market turmoil, there's a deeper concern: the erosion of trust in the global trading system. The rules-based order that has underpinned global prosperity for decades is under threat, replaced by a free-for-all where might makes right. And in this new world disorder, it's the little guy, the consumer, who ultimately pays the price. The automotive industry, a poster child for globalization, finds itself caught in the crossfire of the trade war. American car makers, already grappling with declining sales and fierce competition, are now facing higher costs for imported parts and materials. General Motors, Ford, and Fiat Chrysler have all announced plant closures and layoffs, blaming the tariffs for adding billions of dollars to their operating costs. Meanwhile, foreign car makers like Toyota and Honda, who manufacture many of their vehicles in the US, are also feeling the pinch. The irony is that the tariffs, intended to protect American jobs, are actually having the opposite effect. By disrupting global supply chains and increasing costs, they're forcing companies to make tough decisions that ultimately hurt American workers. It's a classic case of unintended consequences, a reminder that even the best-laid plans can go awry. Section 5 Tech's Trade Tremors. The tech sector, a shining beacon of American innovation, hasn't escaped the trade war unscathed. Apple, the world's most valuable company, is feeling the heat as tariffs threaten to increase the price of iPhones, Macs, and other gadgets. The company, which relies heavily on Chinese manufacturing, is reportedly exploring ways to shift production to other countries, but such a move would be costly and time-consuming. Other tech giants like Microsoft, HP, and Dell are facing similar challenges. The tariffs are not only driving up prices for consumers but also stifling innovation. The uncertainty surrounding trade policy is making it difficult for companies to plan for the future, leading to delays in investment and product development. In the cutthroat world of tech, where innovation is the key to survival, the tariffs are acting as a drag on growth and competitiveness. Section 6. The price of protectionism. Let's be clear. Tariffs aren't just some abstract economic concept debated by academics and policymakers. They have real-world consequences, and nowhere are those consequences felt more acutely than in the wallets of ordinary Americans. From cars and electronics to clothing and food, the prices of everyday goods are rising, eating away at consumers' purchasing power. The Federal Reserve, tasked with keeping inflation in check, is caught between a rock and a hard place. Raising interest rates might cool down the economy, but it could also trigger a recession. Keeping rates low could fuel inflation, further eroding consumers' purchasing power. It's a lose-lose situation, and there's no easy way out. The tariffs, intended to protect American jobs and industries, are having the perverse effect of hurting the very people they were supposed to help. Section 7. Voices from the trenches. The debate over tariffs is often framed in terms of abstract economic indicators, GDP growth, trade deficits, and job creation. But behind these numbers are real people, whose lives and livelihoods are being impacted by the trade war. Farmers, already struggling with low commodity prices and extreme weather events, are facing a double whammy as tariffs close off export markets and drive down prices. Factory workers, promised a resurgence in manufacturing, are seeing their jobs shipped overseas as companies seek to avoid the tariffs. And consumers, faced with rising prices and stagnant wages, are left wondering if anyone in Washington is looking out for their interests. The trade war is a stark reminder that economic policy is not a zero-sum game. There are winners and losers, and in this case it seems like the losers are outnumbering the winners. Section 8. A gamble on the future. The U.S. trade policy is a gamble, a high-stakes bet on the future of the American economy. The Trump administration is betting that the short-term pain of tariffs will be outweighed by the long-term benefits of a more favorable trade balance and a resurgence in domestic manufacturing, but it's a risky bet, one that could backfire spectacularly. The global economy is interconnected, and disrupting those connections comes at a cost. The tariffs could trigger a trade war, leading to higher prices, job losses, and slower economic growth. They could also damage America's reputation as a reliable trading partner, making it harder to forge new agreements and maintain existing ones. The stakes are high and the outcome is far from certain. Section 9. Charting a course correction. So, where do we go from here? The U.S. trade policy has created a mess, a tangled web of tariffs and retaliatory measures that is hurting businesses and consumers alike. The first step is to acknowledge that tariffs are not the answer. They are a blunt instrument, a sledgehammer in a world that requires surgical precision. The U.S. needs to engage in constructive dialogue with its trading partners, addressing legitimate concerns about unfair trade practices while avoiding protectionist measures that harm everyone involved. This means returning to the negotiating table, working within the framework of the World Trade Organization to resolve disputes and find common ground. It also means investing in education and training, preparing American workers for the jobs of the future, rather than trying to cling to the jobs of the past. The path forward is clear, but it requires leadership, vision, and a willingness to put the interests of the many ahead of the interests of the few.